You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
Out of the 1962 World's Fair, this Space Needle. Good evening. I am your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. If you're not a subscriber to the podcast, please do so by going to your favorite podcasting platform. Just search U.S. Phenomenon, or you can go to my website, onairmario.com, to subscribe. Tonight, we talk all things in general, but most times we haven't hit this topic. I know I kind of fluttered about it last week about talking about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, but tonight we're going to go deep in the woods. Deep in the woods with our two guests tonight who are going to spend most of their evening talking about a couple things that are coming out, the premiere of a docuseries. Tobe Johnson and Brett, welcome to U.S. Phenomenon.
Hey, Mario. Thanks for having us.
Mario.
Oh, man, it's been forever, right? It's been a while.
I had to say it. Good to see you, man.
Okay, so let's talk about what you guys got coming out. You got a premiere coming out on a docuseries. I know that you had a previous docuseries out, but what's going on right now? What are you guys doing?
So we've got a sequel coming up to our first film, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. The new film is called A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal, Bigfoot. And we are doing a screening, actually, of it this Sunday down in Portland, just south of Portland, in Tualatin, Oregon, at a Cabela's, of all places. We did a premiere of the film back in September at Phenomicon. And the movie is available. Folks out there that are listening that can't make it, it is available on Vimeo. And it will be expanding here in the next, hopefully, fingers crossed, few weeks, so that people anywhere and everywhere can watch it.
Perfect. All right. So let's get into what I missed last week. We were talking briefly on the show about Bigfoot sightings and, coming out of Spooktober and other crazy stuff going on, mass shootings going on. All right. So where can people go? Because I was looking and someone who's not a true native investigator, where would someone like myself go if you're just the average Jane or John out in the woods and you have a paranormal experience or you see Bigfoot? Where are we sending these people to these days?
I mean, if we're going to go there, in the backdrop of the show here, at least what I see behind my left shoulder is Mount Rainier. That's, generally speaking, from, I think you're in West Seattle area there, less than an hour and a half or so. Of course, rush hour is a thing, but there's so much action going on near Mount Rainier. You could find yourself all sorts of places. One of the people in our documentary that we highlight is a gal by the name of Barb Shoop. And Barb Shoop is what I would call a Sasquatch contactee. And Barb has had consistent sightings of interacting with a group of newbies and seasoned experiencers and other Sasquatch contactees. And she kind of holds their hand as they kind of learn the way of the woods and how these beings interact with humans, generally speaking. And that's what she does. She does it like 4 or 5 months out of the year, I think, and takes them to the backside of Mount Rainier. And there's quite a bit of experiences that happen with skeptical people. I mean, you don't have to be a believer to have a concrete Bigfoot experience. It's really to the contrary. And so Barb Shoop is just one of those witnesses that we highlight in this documentary, Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot.
And when people think of paranormal Bigfoot, or you hear this for the first time, are people like, for me, I know we've had this conversation multiple times, but for those that don't know, I am a believer that I'd like my Bigfoot to be indigenous to the planet. Now, Do I solely believe that that's the case? I don't know, because I still haven't had my own experience in regards to seeing a Bigfoot. I will tell you though, I did when I was in a lifetime ago, when I was in a long-term committed relationship with my ex-fiance at the time. We were heading up off of 410 up to Sunset Peak of Mount Rainier to go watch the sunset. We never made it up because, one, on the back roads, as we continue to go through the Forest Service Road where the gates are, but they're open. As we got like maybe 5 miles in, it was starting to condense down. There were logs, limbs, tree limbs that were stacked back to back to back. So they were all, and I was like, oh, that's strange. And so we rolled over them, in the 4x4, no problem. Kept driving, kept driving. We'd see more. We'd go over them again. I was like, God, it's weird. So I stopped to check if maybe someone had put them there because maybe there was mud track or something like that was fresh, and they just, wanted to make sure that people were getting stuck. So we continued driving up. I got to the point where we saw bigger logs, but we also saw rock formations, and then that's when I stopped. And if I was to go to you guys as experts, what would you say to me?
I don't know, Brett. What would you say to him?
I would say to proceed with caution. Get out there. Some of the signs that you might be looking for are twisted tree breaks. Bigfoot are known to twist branches off or twist trees instead of just snapping them or breaking them. Listen for strange knocking sounds. Kind of, keep your nose open for some strange skunk-like, wet dog-like, foul odors. The thing about it is that people are out there in the woods all the time, and they've never seen a Bigfoot, but I guarantee they've been seen by a Bigfoot, especially if you're an avid hiker or outdoors person.
I will say this real quick though, Mario. The location you're talking about is, like I said, the backside of Rainier near Greenwater area, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I just spoke with Barb Shoop last week, and she described something very similar that happened this summer to her. In this case, though, it wasn't logs stacked bump to bump. There was 40 some salmon that were laid out in the grass from fin to face, all in a row. So this may be something indicative of a behavior out there. I've not seen that before, but there is this weird inquisitive manner of, you know, organizing things together in weird shapes and patterns. So that's interesting that you said that, because I never heard that. Now I've heard it, about the same area from two different witnesses.
Quite interesting. And we had the German Shepherd with us. Foolish because I was not packing any heat with me at the time. And now that I think about it, I was like, we ended up turning around because my inner gut just said, you know what, we need to turn around. We need to go back. And we left. We got to the point where the logs were big enough that I was like, somebody doesn't want us up here, period. To me, that's what, and then she was like, no, it's fine. Just go move the logs. We'll be fine. I'm like, I'm going to move these logs and I'm going to become, we're not doing the show here today. I mean, I don't know that to be back. But tongue in cheek, just more joking around. But I was like, no, we got to go. Something doesn't want us up here. If it's someone living up there, someone staying up there.
Right.
Very quite interesting. I do love that Mount Rainier area just because those who have shared their experiences with me, if it was from the U.S. Phenomenon Bigfoot Roundtable thing that we did about a year ago, a lot of people from Buckley, Washington who attended said they had somewhere avid military hunters had seen, and this guy his voice was shaking. There was no BS in him. This guy was truly giving his testimony, and I was like, this guy is not lying. Whatever he saw, he said it scared the living crap out of him. Big dude, just big big dude. He's like, I'm not scared of anything. I'm out there. And he goes, I was freaked out. Like my friend was like, he couldn't speak. Both of them were like, let's just not say anything to anyone. Let's just move on. And I think they were somewhere up in the foothills near Mount Rainier, and they actually jumped back because they had come up the crest to this area, and they just saw this Bigfoot swing off, is what he said. And he said he was like petrified. He's like, it was not a bear. This was not a bear. And he said the stench was like unbelievable. That's what he said. So, I mean, you got to believe you when you hear these testimonials from others who have had these experiences. What do you guys? I mean, how during these docuseries that you guys have done, the information that you are getting, what moves you to believe that this is not something indigenous to the planet?
That's a great question, Mario. It's like what you just said. I mean, a lot of this is eyewitness testimony, and they say that 90% of communication is body language, and you can tell that when somebody's telling you a story, you can tell they're telling the truth because of the way they're focused, they're sitting, they want you to hone in on what it is that they're saying. They choose their words very carefully, and they're able to repeat the story over and over and over again. Oftentimes, we get to some of these eyewitnesses, years or months after this thing has happened. And, people know the difference between a bear and a Bigfoot. They know the difference between a lightning bug and an orb. They're two entirely different things. You mentioned at the opening of the show that you'd like to believe that these things are indigenous, and they are indigenous. I think they may have been here longer than us. I mean, there's all kinds of wild theories that are floating around, but what makes them paranormal is their abilities to do things that we quite can't understand yet with science. But I think that, and again, we get into this with our second film, A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. We get into the science aspect of things. And I think once people can kind of start wrapping their head around the science, around the quantum mechanics, the quantum physics and stuff, this stuff, including, and I'm talking about ghosts, aliens, all this other kind of stuff that use paranormal abilities. And remember, Jesus Christ used paranormal abilities in the Bible. So, I mean, this stuff isn't necessarily scary, and Bigfoot aren't necessarily out to kill you. But that doesn't make a difference when you see something that your mind can't comprehend.
So I want to focus before we start moving on. And this is something that I talked about, the anniversary of this individual. And this is a story. I know that there's a guy that does the missing 401. They still have not found that professor who went hiking, Sam DeBall, who went hiking a couple of years ago on the Mother Mountain, Mowich Lake loop. I guess he's seasoned vet, but he went during October, that touch and go season. I guess the weather shifted and changed on him. The river took out the bridge there for him, not giving him access to the entire loop. He went missing. The only thing they found from him was his water bottle. Supposedly, allegedly, he had his tent. He was seasoned backpacker. They found nothing. Now, I asked this question. Do we believe that if Bigfoot is living in these national parks, is this something that's being hushed up? Like the national government's like, hey, see nothing. Why are we not getting more than just a water bottle? I mean, a dented water bottle. This is crazy to me. Are we talking about, as some people would say, a rogue Sasquatch? I mean, we've heard different other investigators say rogue Sasquatch or whatever. Are Bigfoots really eating human beings, though? That's where I guess I'm going to go with my question.
I'll throw out a couple of thoughts here, and then I know Tobe can expand upon it. Bigfoot are like people. They all have different personalities, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Bigfoot aren't capable of killing people and that they don't kill people, because I have no proof of either. There's serial killers out there. There are people in this world today, right now, that are killing other people at this very minute. Whether it's warfare or it's murder or what have you, it's happening all over the place in the world. And we don't know what their motives are. What we do know is that they're not all the same. They don't behave like a mountain lion or a bear. They behave like people. And so it is quite possible that, this professor guy or any number of people that have gone missing in the wilderness are victims of a Sasquatch attack. That's entirely possible. It's also possible that they were abducted by aliens. And it's also possible that they've fallen down an embankment and were slowly eaten away. We show a time lapse in our first film, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, of a deer, and how fast a deer disappears in the forest. It doesn't take weeks, it takes days, because anything and everything in the woods, in the wilderness, is starving. And if you're a food source, you're going to be eaten. So, there's a famous case, Albert Ostman in British Columbia, I think the turn of the century, or maybe a little bit after, he was kidnapped. And, they tried debunking his story, and a lot of it checked out. So, there's other, native tales of the same type of thing, of them being kidnapped. And we touch on that a little bit again in the first documentary. So it's not totally out of the question, but again, they're not all, human eaters.
It might be different rules too for going into the woods compared to them coming to your property, which, I think is primarily how I suggest people interact and look into this subject matter, is just sitting around and waiting for the phenomena to come to you in a Sasquatch rich environment or a paranormal rich environment. And you can find these areas because I think that they're probably in what I would call, geological or geomanced areas that are convexed. These power sources of the paranormal seem to coalesce based upon the geology that presents itself. So the bottom of a reservoir, for example, with mountains on the side of it, also where there are power lines flowing through there. In fact, I just looked into a case, Mel Skahan, one of our witnesses, and a native Yakima native that is in Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. And the sighting, I had no idea. It was right on a power line, though, I found out yesterday. And you find that time and time again, rock quarries, power lines, bottom of a parabolic dish-shaped area, lots of wildlife like that, those shapes as well, too, because it's easier to make their way through traffic. But I think there's something else going on here as far as them adapting and utilizing energy. And we talk about that in part 2 of the documentary. This documentary is here to blow minds. It's here to blow paradigms. That's what we do podcasts for, is to rip apart these old narratives that this is a rare issue. It's not rare at all to see a Bigfoot. I think it's more rare to see a cougar. People don't talk about it because just of all the stigma surrounding it. Very difficult. Now it's getting easier to talk about this because of things like this without the X-Files music in the background happening all the time. And I think as that issue finds its way to mainstream, this Bigfoot subject is going to be easier for people to talk about. That's why you see all these conferences like Brett and I do, where we don't just have a Bigfoot conference. You can't just have a Bigfoot conference anymore. You have to have a UFO conference in tow with it, because that's what I think we're dealing with here. We're dealing with some type of alien in nature. This is not just a relic hominid. I used to hem and haw about saying that. Dude,
Right.
This is so much cooler than King Kong. This is an ultra terrestrial being that can bend space and time, can read your mind, can do things straight out of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It fundamentally transforms the conversation, and it needs to be had more and more. And that's why, this film's so important in conversations with you, Mario.
It's interesting. I appreciate you guys coming on this evening. So here's something that I'll just throw out there for our listeners as we get close to the bottom of the hour. But can you imagine, and this is going to be that, let me just, it's funny, it's just sitting here, but this book here, to keep, what some people may read and may not read, which is the Bible, was actually put on this planet by aliens who actually created humans to sit here and watch us. Are these things being talked about at these paranormal conferences that you guys are having? Is this being brought up?
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, and you don't have to leave your intellect at the door to have these conversations. The brilliant minds that have been sitting back at these conferences who have now come to the stage and are talking about it. It's intimidating. I mean, they're just it's quite a legacy of knowledge that they've been having privately, throughout this documentary. And Brett, maybe you want to talk about Simeon Hine at length here, but throughout this documentary, we needed to have someone anchor this in science and talk about, hey, what is the science behind cloaking? What is the science behind this? Is this anybody else looking into something like this? Well, yeah, they have. Only we haven't been, told about it for the most part. We've been made to feel foolish for thinking that it exists. Well, that patents on it. And so, people are going to learn who Simeon Hine is and how important dialogue about, something like cloaking is to have.
Yeah, I remember pretty vividly. I think a lot of us, when we were little kids, sometimes we'd hear our parents or adults talking about something we wanted to know more about, and we would say, "What are you talking about? What's going on?" And the response we would always hear is, "You're not old enough to understand." And I believe that the general public is not old enough or mature enough to understand what's really, truly going on out there. And I also wanted to go back to your point with the Bible too, Mario, and reiterate that one of the things that we sought out to figure out through these documentaries was where does this align with religion? Is religion, when I say religion, I mean more like spirituality, God, Jesus, and we even touch on Buddhism and Islam and so on and so forth. But what we wanted to figure out was, is there something there? And from what we can tell, there is also something there. So we might have this galactic federation of alien species that are buzzing around in UAPs, and we may have Bigfoot and so on and so forth. And I'm not here to preach, but it seems to me from the stories that we've heard that all of them answer to some sort of a supreme creator. And so I found that that's really interesting. So not to get too sidetracked here, which I am now losing my train of thoughts.
That's my job.
The point is that the rabbit hole is deep and it's never ending.
All right, guys, that's it. Well, that's all the time we got for that. It's quite intriguing because definitely would be bad for business, for mega churches, things of that nature, until something happens, a rapture, or something crazy happens. If we're talking about paranormal, Bigfoot, and the reason why, and we kind of touched about the alien stuff, why are we not seeing more? It's very interesting to me that it's almost like tongue in cheek, where we're getting these sightings, but if we're talking about all this time that's happened in the last 70 years, 80 years, 100 years of recorded history of, the Mount Rainier sightings, the alleged over there, the Murray Island incident versus, the UFO incident down in, Area 51 in Roswell. And I always get pissed and I get so mad because the stuff at Mount Rainier and the alleged incident that happened over, and I point over to the direction of,
you're pointing at it.
like anyone can hear that.
Yeah, right. I get it. I know what you're doing, but yeah.
To Maury Island, because I'm in West Seattle, formerly known as the West Vashon Island. Formerly the area known as West Vashon Island. But Maury Island incident, these two incidences, I don't think get publicly talked about as much as Roswell. And it pisses me off. I'm like, no, this is the Mecca here, not Roswell. This is the Mecca. This needs to be the new Mecca of paranormal activity. Where do you guys fall in line? I mean, obviously you're from here, or maybe you're with you. You're like, yeah. But
We're lifers, dude. I don't
right,
know.
yeah.
I don't know if I want it to be the hot spot, because then we have, all this pristine research area taken over. It's much easier to talk about other people's areas. Like I can call Oregon a hotbed now that I'm not up there, because Brett can deal with all the tourists. But no, I get what you're saying. And if your greater question is why, I mean, I understand, first of all, your importance about the Maury Island incident. Not enough people do know about that, and it's a big segue away from Bigfoot.
for sure.
But is it? Because it has all the kind of same, there's a cloak and dagger element to the whole Maury Island thing that reminds me of the Bigfoot lore. Of course, did it happen the way they said it happened? I don't know. But regardless, I mean, you're going to have more sightings, in my opinion, of the UFO stuff, just based upon the fact that of the vastness of the open area. And generally speaking, people just don't go in the woods and stay that long. That's why you have a lot of roadside crossings, because not too many people are getting out and going hiking anymore. But man, oh man, there's tons of places all around here people could go have a sighting. We have a guy named Henry Franzoni in our doc who wrote a book that was basically saying, if you go to places that have spooky names on Google Earth, places like Devil Mountain or Spirit Lake or Wendigo Ridge or Skookum Creek, all these places have a name for a reason. There's a place in Oregon called Baboon Creek. How do you think it got its name, Baboon Creek? So these are Sasquatch rich environments where you can go have encounters on your own. And I think that's really, what people, I don't know too many people that have looked into the subject matter, and I don't think Brett has either, that have walked away a skeptic. I mean, Brett and Jill have walked away with experiences because they've invested time in these research areas and they kind of been led. So now they're little squatchers having their own experiences. So it just, I've never seen anybody pull away from this and say, it's all BS. It doesn't happen that way.
No. And I just want to add to this, like the more that we do the research, what we're finding out too, Mario, is that there are hot spots such as Skinwalker Ranch, in any other number of areas around the world that are like Skinwalker Ranch. And then I think there are hot spots within. I think there are people that are antennas for this type of stuff. Daryl Adams, somebody that's featured in both films, is certainly an example of that. But, there are people who are hot spots in their own bedroom,
Hey now.
Yeah. Hey, there is that. Sorry, guys. It's a family-friendly radio show. But anyways, you know what I'm saying? It's like you're either on Wi-Fi or you're on the cell network, but no matter where you go, you're getting a signal. And there's some people out there with implants in them. So I think part of it has to do with, what kind of energy are you putting out in the universe? What is it that piques the interest of these things, regardless of whether they're Bigfoot or aliens? There are a lot of people out there. I know Barb Shoop is but one example, who have experienced any and every type of paranormal activity, from the orbs to the Bigfoot to seeing portals open in front of her very eyes, in her tent, no less. So she might be one of those individuals that maybe she's got extra iron in her blood, or she's got that rare blood type, that some people talk about. But, like I said, the hot spots can kind of follow you around.
When you talked about her having a portal or whatever in the tent, I made me think of the wise tale that was once told on C to C, in regards to somewhere over in Cleellum or Elchenberger or wherever. I forget, they had this 80,000 foot hole that they could never find. Okay, so I think the one thing that always gets asked, maybe it doesn't, but I know that I always like to ask this question: if the day of technology is the way it is, we have these great phones, camera phones, things like that, and it's which is fantastic. Why are we not seeing more great footage of these paranormal Bigfoot? And the other thing is, why are we not finding carcasses? I know you said earlier what the situation may be. Is this because, one, are they if they are to leave this plane, let's say they're from here, if they leave the plane like we do, as we decompose, is there any research out there that leads us to believe that they have found carcasses, bones, hair?
Mhm.
Where are we at with that? Are we finding any of that kind of stuff around? I mean, I can shave my chest and throw it out in the woods, but that ain't.
And if you go through the old newspapers, you can find evidence of giants. I mean, Lovelock Cave is one of those places in eastern Nevada. Oops, sorry, my phone.
Oh, good.
That's the FBI calling. But when you talk about giants, are you talking about Bigfoot? I don't know if they're synonymous. I mean, really, giants are described altogether different than Sasquatch is described in general. Sasquatch are usually only about 8 feet in height. Giants are described anywhere from 15 feet in height, and those newspaper articles are very, very credible. It's just where's the evidence of these things? That's when the Smithsonian usually steps in and all the evidence disappears. We talked to a gal named Marcia K. Moore, who's looking into evidence of giants, including the elongated people that seem to have migrated all the way up from South America up to Canada and Alaska and left their trail. In some cases, their skeletal remains along in Washington and Oregon. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, a couple of points here too, and I want to get back to your question about why they're not being photographed. But first and foremost, we have an Army intelligence analyst that was based just south of you there at the big old military complex, and he read after action reports of government agents going out into the Gifford Pinchot National Forest and taking down Sasquatch. And he claims that they were sending him to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to be autopsied or necropsied or whatever you want to call it. So they don't being that they're paranormal, they don't just kind of like disappear like Yoda did or Obi-Wan Kenobi. They don't just kind of like disappear into the ether. So there is that. So there are a ton of reports of bodies. I believe that they bury their dead. We've spoken to some native people. Thomas Seawood, who is native to Vancouver Island, talks about how they bury their dead. I've talked to some other natives in the Midwest that say they bury their dead. I think that's entirely possible. I think that makes perfect sense. They're a secret society. They want to stay hidden. They don't want anybody to find them. Let's talk about cameras real quick. One of the reasons people aren't getting good photos of Bigfoot is because people aren't professional photographers. That's, how often do you log into Facebook, anytime during the summer and see people posting great photos of mountain lions or wolverines or any number of wild animals that they've seen on their camping adventures or hiking adventures. You hear the story, but you don't necessarily see the photos. Sure. People are out there getting photos of these things, and they're getting shoulders, they're getting heads, they're getting some blurry stuff.
It's like,
Yeah. Some of it's hoaxed, some of it's legitimate. I watched one today where, it looked very legitimate. So there's some legitimate stuff out there. I believe 100% that the Patterson-Gimlin film is legitimate. The other thing too is that when you see something like this, the last thing you're thinking about, and I'm talking, as a professional camera person myself, the last thing you think about is taking out a camera and taking pictures of it, because you're in the moment. You're seeing something you can't comprehend, and you need to kind of like absorb it. And I think that humans sometimes forget that we are still, we still have a reptilian primordial center in our brain, and we need to assess whether we're predator or prey. And that factors in, when people see these things. You're not just like, whoa, a Bigfoot, and you take out your camera like you're at Disneyland seeing Mickey Mouse. It just doesn't work like that. And then 15 seconds later, they're gone.
Right.
Real quick before you interject, Mario, to go off what you're saying, Brett, talk more about the optics of Bigfoot and the possibility that something else is going on. We're going to come back to Barb Shoop here, because when Barb Shoop was filming this footage of this cloaking Sasquatch in Greenwater, Washington, incredible footage that people can see, she sees with her eyes something altogether different. She sees a little black shape scoot across the forest floor, but her camera catches the predator. The pixelation of shoulders and head, like a liquid raindrop moving through the brush, about 4 feet high, in my opinion, something very small, low to the ground. But it's not a black figure at all. It's this matrix of bent light that you see in this footage here. So to get to your point, and to get to Brett's point, and I'd love to hear you guys talk about this, is something else is going on with how they interfere with the digital layers. We saw that at the Owl Moon Lab. We called it layer caking. And this is where EVPs come from. This is where UFOs toy with you. This is the trickster at its best, is that it's finding ways to imprint. So if it's not something you see or hear, it may be caught on your camera's audio, but not with your ears. And you see what I'm saying? So you have to find the layers of where these things happen. And that gets very hard to prove. This is where we have a problem with research, because you can kind of study this. And the guys at Skinwalker Ranch are probably best known for ways of trying to study this, but it really won't let you study it that well. You can't duplicate it. It always finds a new way to mess with you, and you can't really get ahead of the curve with it. So this is my point: is that how you ever going to prove this to be? You can force people to hear your story, but they're going to, how much fact is actually in your story to begin with? I try to push people to have an experience. That's the idea, is that, hey, you can go out here and you can have your own legitimate story. Don't worry about mine.
I guess my question, I like listening to this, and I have so many things going through my brain, because there's so many great researchers out there. You said Tom, you have Moorhead, who is also, and some of these guys are getting older in age. These stories that are enrich his experience, being one of the top experiences of all, being famous for being out in the middle of freaking nowhere in a mountain, and listening to him share his experience and sharing his audio. It blows my mind. I'm like, and I know that he's a much older individual, but it's like these stories, they don't burn away. They become legends, right? And people like yourself, like both of you guys, are now coming up through the ranks of doing your own research to become these next experts. Not saying that you're not experts like they are, but these guys have got that, that old school clout, we want to call that, I don't know. The word just passes my mind. Just
time and service. I mean, they've served their ranks, and it's big boots to fill. But when it comes to Ron Moorhead, I don't know, Brett. Do you want to tell him what's going on?
Yeah. So we're doing our next film on the Sierra Sounds and the voices in the wilderness, and Ron's experience up there at the Sierra camp. And I know a lot more about this subject than I can talk about right now, because it goes beyond what Ron has written. And obviously Ron has talked about, the experiences that he shared with other men up there, but those experiences started, before Ron came up to the camp. And so we're interviewing some of those guys that are still around. They're in their 80s right now. And we've interviewed them, we've talked to them, and we're finding out that there were a lot of things that were happening up there that the general public just doesn't know about. And in my mind, I feel like it was almost like a Gorillas in the Mist kind of a Jane Goodall kind of a thing, where not only were they being studied, but they were studying them back just by virtue of being in that camp for consecutive years on end and recording them and observing this kind of ghostly behavior where things would happen, but they would never see it happen. Hardly any of these guys would have, Ron caught a glimpse of a Bigfoot. Ron's daughter Rhonda saw one. And some of the other folks didn't see anything. They would see like these shapes in moonlight, or they'd be looking up through their lean-to, and the stars would black out for a second, like something was moving over the top of their camp. But what I can tell you is I think that the evidence that those guys have gathered, especially what Ron has been so courageous to gather, is some of the best evidence, if not the best evidence, to prove that these beings exist.
I think that's going to be awesome to see on film, because we have it in audio form.
Mm-hmm.
Have him share his stories on US Phenomenon multiple times. To me, what's interesting is that when you hear these sounds, people, because these recordings that he's sharing with everyone, it's a different experience. It's nothing we've ever heard before. But the first thing you hear is you try to relate this audio with something in your head. You're like, what does that sound from? To me, and as I told Ron, and like, not to be disrespectful, I was like, this is nothing I've ever heard. But to me, what I'm hearing are sounds of what we used to hear back in the cartoon days, of what you'd wake up Saturday and you watch Bugs Bunny and you see the Roadrunner and you see the Tasmanian Devil, and to me it felt like that, or hearing that audio is what to me it sounded like. Not to be disrespectful to him, and not saying that what he had was not real. It was what I could relate to. And I think as humans, we always want to relate audio to what the sound is. They're like, oh, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But by means, that's not what that was.
And earlier you brought up Brett Albert Osman. He was the first one that ever talked about language as it pertains to Bigfoot that I know of. I mean, the news article, people can go look up. He didn't use the word samurai chatter, which I believe Matt Moneymaker made up to describe the Sierra sounds. But I think he came close to trying to describe it. And that's exactly what you hear. I mean, it really sounds like the Tasmanian Devil meets like a really bad samurai movie scene from the 70s or something. But with all the complexity of what Scott Nelson, cryptolinguist, tries to describe, does describe in the documentary, of these morphine streams, which if I were to try to dissect what Scott is calling a morphine stream, I'll probably fall short. But I believe a morphine stream is a conversation structure and all the tonalities and meaning behind inflection. And these have that, including throughout them are what are called terminal endings. And so what a terminal ending is when you and I, Mario, have a conversation, I'll make my point and then I'll say something that will end the sentence. Okay, the finality of the volume and the tone of the end of a thought. That is throughout these morphine streams. And you get that complexity of these morphine streams coming up over and over again. Not only that, is that we recorded the same thing in Cottage Grove. This doesn't just happen in the Sierra Sounds. The complexity of Sasquatch language is based upon, in my opinion, from the work of David Ellis, who brought this up to me, is that, oh yeah, they talk when they're in a group of one or more. So that's why we don't hear them always talking, because we're having individual sightings and they're working up to a relationship of some kind, with an individual, probably not a group as much, but because they were coming up to the high Sierras, I think that's probably why, is that they were constantly coming up there and they could see the same faces and they could see Rhonda grow as a kid and just like, oh, now we know, this family's back up here. But yeah, it is one of the most, like Brett says, this is it. This is the Patterson-Gimlin of audio. It really is. I mean, besides Bob and Patterson's story, and you're right, these guys are getting older, so we have to still tell their stories quick and artfully and, ask the public to help us and all that stuff. And I think that's going to happen. But, Ron is, he's the only cowboy left really to talk about the Sierra Sasquatch sounds as it pertains to the voices in the wilderness. And we just want to put as many like minds together to say, hey, this is an important part of not only Bigfoot history, but all of our history. I mean, because if they're telling the truth, which I have no doubt that they are, it changes everything. Because if they have language, folks, they have culture, and that changes it all.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that's important too is that there may never be another opportunity to record the vocalizations that these men recorded in the early 70s, early to mid 70s. How often do folks get an opportunity like that? Now, with that being said, howls and a sentence here, a sentence there, chatter, or whatever, those things are being recorded around the country, as a matter of fact. But I mean, these things were having like full conversations. And as time went by, like kind of like what Tobe was talking about, as time went by at the Sierra camp, the conversations would be less and less aggressive. So they would go from being like, you can hear them beating on their chests or making other kind of aggressive noises to in the later years more of a gentle type conversation, and they became playful. So this was really unprecedented, and I'm so glad that these guys had the sense of mind to bring recorders up there and record these things. I think that once we're able to really kind of get somebody to go through all of the hours of recorded material seriously, like somebody like Scott Nelson, and I'm talking about like a crew, we're going to make some massive discoveries about who they are and how they work. And I truly believe that AI is going to begin assisting with this stuff. And I've already seen some shades of that from some detectives, some audio detectives have been posting some stuff on Reddit of some potential translations that are starting to actually make sense. So I think it's exciting once we're able to really dive into this stuff to learn more about them.
When you're talking about the aggressive sounds, and for those who haven't heard Ron's story, it's in a previous podcast. You can find obvious shameless plug because it's there. Just search US Phenomenon or just go to our website onairmario.com and find it. As you were talking about the aggressive sounds, the beating of the chest, and then Tobe earlier talking about how, and you guys were talking about how they would continue to go up there, and Ron's daughter growing up, and being such a little young lady growing up, in going back, them becoming familiarized with Ron and team and fam, that things. So we're saying the Sasquatch or whoever they were coming in contact with had become accustomed to them or had recognized them and be like, it's like running across the street, like, oh, hey, Brett, how's it going? It's like we're at a bar, I accidentally bump you and you're like, dude, what the heck? You spilt your beer on me. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, we both like Bigfoot. Oh my God, we're best friends now. And then it's like, hey, it went from an aggressive situation to commonality. We're like, we love the same things. They love being in the woods. They love being in the woods. A family, I'm sure Bigfoot's running packs with, have family. This is just my guess. I'm not talking like Harry Henderson's type of situation, but, having a family and seeing a family, almost having that, almost like a mirror image, but right in front of you. Other than that, we're not as hairy as they might be, as
It might be like Harry and the Hendersons too, because the end of Harry and the Henderson is kind of how it is, because they're never really alone. I think people think they're alone.
Yeah,
they're not really ever alone, from what I've been able to find out myself. There's always a group on the periphery, a bigger one, let's say a sentry, something watching the action happening down below. I think that's why the younger ones, the teenager ones, the juvies, if you will, are more the pranksters. They're more they have the teenage energy. They take risk, but they're being constantly monitored. The audio that we collected down in Cottage Grove, you can hear interaction between what sounds like a younger one coming in on the apple orchard and a dominant, louder male type voice, kind of giving a stern talking to that one for its behavior. it's very human like in all sorts of ways with that. So that just gets back to, Brett's earlier point that they're all individuals. And I think that's what people need to wrap their mind around, is that this is a type of people, strange people compared to the way we live. But boy, once you get to know the behavior, it becomes a lot less creepy. And, this goes back to Ron's experience up there. There's this inquisitive nature of like, well, how are we going to do this? Because you live down there in the city with the bright lights, and I'm up here, man, in the snow and in the dark most of the time. And we just don't, we can't really do much with one another right now. So there's this hesitancy on both sides because of the fear. But that's not the way the real Bigfoot thing is. I mean, in this documentary, you see people engage the phenomena at different levels, and then you see people go full on down the rabbit hole. And, that's where I'm at with it all, because it's done nothing but really bring happiness in my life. I've met some really interesting people, but this kind of goes back to the faith thing, because, man, if this is real, it's game on with the rest of these things that people said aren't real, including God. So this is incredibly diverse, planet we live on, including this kind of paranormal diversity, which isn't explored enough in a thoughtful way.
I will say this, and we'll talk about the premiere real quick again before we head out. But the last sighting in Seattle was at it's called Climate Pledge now, but formerly known as Key Arena. 15 to 16 years ago was the last sighting of a Sasquatch in the city. You guys, that's the Supersonics mask.
Supersonics.
Oh.
Yeah, that's my joke.
Oh, nice.
So Mario, the Trailblazers now have a Sasquatch mascot, right?
No, please don't.
Yeah.
No.
So quick story, real quick. Okay. So, because you guys are now, you should be, if you're not already, de facto Portland Trailblazer fans. One day you'll get your Sonics back, I promise, and then you can go back to normal. But I called a radio show last year. I'm not taking credit for this, but I called a radio show called Rip City Radio, and I was talking about the Blazers, and I was talking about Bigfoot, because somebody called into the show and they were talking about Bigfoot. So I called in. I was like, hey, I made a Bigfoot documentary. I know a thing or two about Bigfoot, and I'm a Blazer fan. And we got to talking about how the Trailblazers in the 80s had a Bigfoot mascot. In fact, I've got an old ticket that has a picture of the Bigfoot on it. So wow. I think we were first, but I said on the air, I said, we've got to bring the Bigfoot back, because it goes back to the roots. It's part of Oregon's identity. And then mysteriously, 4 months later, towards the end of the season, they released the Bigfoot mascot, which is named Doug Fur. So Google Doug Fur and you'll see him. He's a zany fella.
That's fantastic. I wanted to ask you guys before we go about the documentary, but the one big story that I don't think gets talked about also is the Mount St. Helens eruption. This big story that was put out that these two service I want to call them, they were weekend warriors that were given guns because they were like, hey, we need you to take care of, we need you to watch this area. But they were bringing in all this live stock from the eruption, and they were putting all the carcasses in a pile. Now, these two individuals who were armed, these weekend warriors were armed with, serious guns, happened to see Bigfoot. They were like, because of the mountain erupting, they're like, that's just bear, whatever. I know the story is huge. It's still floating around. But do you guys ever talk about that story very often?
Yeah, in fact, people can tune into a Flash of Beauty, the podcast, and we talked to an insider from Fort Lewis. Kind of blew our mind, but it turns out there's some gates up on Mount St. Helens that dictate where things happen, including what you described. And according to this insider, Kyle, was that his name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Kyle, cloaked in pixels. Kyle, I never got to meet the guy, But yeah, he says that was a real event, and that Sasquatch. Not only that, but they were taking the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, home of the Roswell debris. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And just to jump in here real quick, I just want to say that this story is huge, actually, Mario, because there are old timers that were in helicopters with these things, and it goes so far and so absurd as someone has claimed that they were touring with the Bigfoot, who was showing them where some of the bodies were in caves and stuff up and around Mount Salem, so they could take some of those bodies out. So, I mean, which sounds crazy, but the one thing I do know is that there's somebody out there that knows the truth, and they're getting old. And if you guys want to talk and you want to get this stuff on camera, please contact us, please, because we don't want this history to go away. We need to get this on camera, and I'm more than happy to record it and put it in a vault someplace. So if you know anything in the Washington area and you were part of some sort of operation, let's get it out there.
Yeah. Send us a text, 775-990-5151. We'll pass it on to Brett and Tobe. We'll get you guys hooked up. Let's talk about it. You said your event is on Sunday. So for those who are listening on our flagship station, 570 KVI, where can people, if someone's like, hey, we got Monday off, you guys are doing a screening of your event. So head down to Portland. What's going on Sunday?
So yeah, we've got a Cabela's down here in Portland. It's in Tualatin, Oregon. It's maybe south of Portland by 10, 15 miles. It's right off of I-5. You can't miss it. And at 2:00, doors open. The movie screens at 2:30. We go until about 4:30. Well, a little bit. Let's see, it's an hour and a half. So we're about 2:50 or about 4:15. And then we're going to do a Q&A. There's going to be some folks that were in the movie that are going to be there, which I know people are going to love to talk to, because these guys have incredible stories. So come on down, meet us, say hi, and have a great time.
So
tickets are $10, by the way.
That's nothing. That's an easy peasy thing to do if you're looking for something to do this weekend and you're like, you know what? Hey, I got Monday off. People trying to burn PTO, take an extra day off. Yeah. Just go do something.
Right.
Go do an adventure. That's what I'm telling everyone to do. Like, life's too short. Go do some adventure. Support local businesses like you guys who are doing this incredible work out here, taking this stuff that, again, like, some of these stories that need to be filmed so that it can be preserved for a lifetime. And for those who haven't shared their stories with that whole base situation, I don't know where the heck I was. I must have been, we were driving somewhere by Roy, and just how the base is close enough. I was like, man, this area, interesting. I don't spend a lot of time there, and I definitely don't now that I'm not in, Bonnie Lake, Buckley, Enumclaw area anymore. But having the opportunity to kind of like do some driving, and I was like, damn, this area looks like it is. It looks like it's a great nesting bed for some serious Bigfoot sightings, is all I'm going to say. And I know that we have a guy who's driven for mass transit, who does these charter buses, who has a lot of great stories. I think his name is Bigfoot. We call him Bigfoot Bob. And Bob has all these stories. People just tell him the stories as he's driving. They share with him almost like a confessional. They come to Bob, and I was like, Bob, you got to come on the show and share these stories. And so he comes on, he just tells all these stories. And there's dignitaries on the bus, and they're sharing their stories. And he's had people who were like, I'm just going to tell you, but you don't know where you heard the story from. And so he gets a lot of this enriched quality stuff. And I'm like, God, Bob, we got to have you back on. So they always call him Bigfoot Bob. He drives charter buses. They got him back out there, and he said he's got a lot of great new material. So we should hook you up with Bob as well. He may have some insight, someone who wants to talk. And so I'll definitely connect you guys together. But again, what a fantastic thing you guys are doing. It's always fun to watch you guys. Tobe, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I know it's been a while since I've had Marcia K. Moore on the show. Marcia it's been forever.
Mhm.
It's been forever since I've had her on, and I always see her fantastic work that she's been doing. And I got hooked her. I think, how did I get hooked up with her? I think through Como TV was how
Oh,
that
right.
uh,
Right.
that's how that came to be.
Mhm.
Eric Johnson. So big shout out to Como TV. Well, at least Eric Johnson, my former employer. I shouldn't, talk too much crap about them in case I ever need to get. But love those guys. I'm like, hey, I love you guys. Not that, but
Nice.
no. Again, thank you so much, guys, for coming on. It's just been fun. It seems like it goes by so fast.
Yeah.
Any last minute quick stories that you guys want to talk about to share with the audience, to something they may want to see if they're like on the edge of maybe coming to the event?
Well, I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you're going to see in this film is going to absolutely, positively, unequivocally blow your mind. And with Dr. Simeon Hine chiming in, who is a Coug, by the way, he's a graduate of University or of Washington State. Sorry, Husky fans. Dr. Simeon Hine has got some incredible science to back a lot of this stuff up. So come on out, and I guarantee you'll walk in after an hour and 40 minutes, you're going to leave a different person.
We look forward to that experience for those who get an opportunity. I'm stuck this weekend. Not that I'm stuck, but I'm on dad duty this weekend, so it's always an honor to put on that hat and spend some time with the young one who's not so young anymore, but pretty much now telling me what to do. I'm like, what's going on here? What's going on? We have to figure out the situation. You have to get some advice from these Bigfoot dads out here that are doing their thing with these younglings out here, these teenage ones. When you're talking about them taking risks, Tobe, I want to get this out there before we wrap things up. It just came to my mind. Do you think are these kids? Do you think these teenage ones are the ones doing the fish type situation? These sticks.
Oh, yeah. I
These
think so. I
these
think so. And that's no excuse, Mario, not to bring your kid to a Bigfoot event. We embrace the youth. We embrace
Yeah.
these baby squatches. So
right,
if you have a tyke and you want to bring them and teach them the squatchy ways,
right.
the weirder the better, right? But yeah, I think so. I think the juvies are the ones that are the ones out there that are taking the risk and getting close to residents and things like that. Now, that's probably not always the case, but I think generally the tracks are about a 14.5 inch, which is, typical standard size for a Bigfoot print. I think that's the lowland size Sasquatch. The bigger ones, the alpha models, the big tracks, like the big ones, the 19 to 20 inch tracks, those are usually higher elevations up there from what I've been able to look at. So, um, you know, probably more hunting or something like that going on up there. Wisdom being granted down from Mount Rainier. So go have your own sighting.
And maybe have a sighting, and make sure you guys reach out to Tobe and Brett, and
Reach out.
please reach out
Please.
if you have a story, or even if you have maybe you saw something at the Mount. I really want this Mount St. Helens thing to get more. I want more footage. I want more
Mhm.
people coming out about this story.
Yeah.
It's on paper, but I want more. I need the tangibles. I want to hear these stories because I think they were told not to say anything for 30 years, and it's been 30 years. It's beyond 30. So come on, bring it. This ain't JFK, baby. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's get it out.
Yep.
And if that's the only sole purpose of doing US Phenomenon, then by all means, damn it, share these stories, because that's exactly what we want. I want people to come collectively together.
Mhm.
It's not my show versus Strange Route Radio, or versus another podcast, or against C2C, or it's not. It's about becoming a network community to make sure that Tobe is heard on a platform that I might be able to share, versus what Brett might be able to bring to US Phenomenon, where people don't have these experiences, who listen to our radio show, may not know about you guys. Now are like, holy crap, I'm on to do a whole nother experience. And that exactly is why we do this every single week. So again, Brett, Tobe, thank you so much for coming on the show this evening. Thank you so much for your guys' time.
Thanks for having us, Mario.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Let's do it
Good to
again
see you
sometime
again.
soon.